Hey folks, Mark Scroggins with Scroggins Law Group. We are back for another edition of the Reclamation Transformation, and we have Cindy Hyde with us once again. How are you today?
I'm good, Mark. How are you?
I am good. Well, hey, I enjoyed our previous conversations about, the control wheels. And so I wanted to continue on that today and specifically get into some of the post-separation economic power and control, and talk about how that is used by the bad actor, I'll say.
Right, yeah. By the unsafe parent or
There you go.
right. And because we have a safe parent and we have an unsafe parent typically in this dynamic.
Right.
And what the unsafe parent experiences, ruined credit. They experience things like inhibited employment or a loss of education because they may have to quit school to try to pay, their financial debt that gets incurred when there's been economic abuse, situations. And so some of them even have to declare bankruptcy or, rely on their parents to help them pay court fees.
Right.
And so it can get really difficult for a safe parent in trying to provide for their children.
Yeah, absolutely. No question. And there's legislation that they've got in the UK, and you see it now in Canada. I think Hawaii instituted some, and it's not, hasn't been adopted throughout the rest of the U.S. And so that's really important to say, is that a lot of the stuff we're talking about, it's really up to your attorney to be able to educate the court as to what is going on and to show that it's actually what you are claiming it to be and not what it appears to be, because sometimes it is exactly what it looks like.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where too, and we've talked about this before, and what I tell my clients is you have to document everything.
Right.
And so if you feel like you're in a situation where there's economic abuse, then you need to make sure that your attorney knows, as quickly as possible, so that then, he or she can talk to the judge to let them know that, hey, we've been in here 10 times already, and this is really a financial drain on my client.
Yeah. And it's something that it has to be part of what your strategy is to inform the court, to educate the court on exactly what is going on. If you have been taken back to court over and over and over again, and there's not a good reason for it, okay, you need to educate the court as to how you are being pulled back on just a bunch of BS type situations. And educating the court on that is really, really important. Okay. Now, it needs to actually be what, you are claiming it to be, or else you can fully expect the wrath of the court to come down and slap you around a little bit on that too.
Exactly.
So let's get into this. Once again, there's another wheel, folks. This is the post-separation economic power and control wheel.
Correct.
And let's talk about these different things and how they are utilized by the bad actor.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So the first cog in the wheel, and there are 8 different cogs here, is using harassment and intimidation.
Correct. Yeah. And so what will happen sometimes is they'll, if they can't get through to you with harassment and intimidation, they'll go after your family and friends and start scaring them, so that then the person, the safe parent then feels like they have to respond because they're, the safe parent's the target. They're
Can you give an example of the harassment? I mean, that you've seen in your practice, or that you're aware of? Because I'm, some of this stuff, frankly, it sounds outlandish, and it is outlandish.
Yeah.
So the average person, I think, can be taken off guard when this kind of stuff appears. So can you give an example?
Yeah. And so not long ago, I heard about a case that they wanted financial money from the safe parent. Even though they made a lot more money, they were saying that the safe parent was coming after them for all their money, when in fact the safe parent was actually choosing not to take anything from the legal proceedings. They just wanted out of the relationship. They didn't want anything. Well, what ended up happening is, because she stopped responding to all of his threats and allegations and everything like that, then he went after her parents and her family, saying, she's trying to take everything I have, and if she gets one penny from me, I'm coming after you. And so then her family's scared, and they don't know what to do. But the truth was that she wasn't asking for anything, and he was the one holding up the divorce proceedings, again, because she's the target, and so he wanted her to feel unsafe, and so that's why he went after her family like that.
Well, so I hope that the families out there that are on the receiving end of this kind of thing would know that is nothing more than a threat. There's nothing that they can do to come after you for money that they lose to the other party in a divorce proceeding. So that's about asinine. It's an empty threat.
Right. Well, and what happens too, if the safe parent hasn't told the family and friends, like, I'm not going after anything, then they don't know who to believe. So then they're thinking, well, is he telling the truth? Is it true that she's going after everything, and now he's going to come after us? And they get scared.
Yeah.
And so then it causes, family upset, which is actually what the unsafe parent wants, is to create chaos and drama and erratic situations.
That's just crazy to me. So the next is using emotional abuse.
Yeah, and so one of the things they do, and I've seen this happen in some of my cases, where if the safe parent makes a purchase for a child, say it's maybe they need a new phone, and so they get them a new phone, then the unsafe parent will start screaming that they're spoiling the child, or they're harming the child by letting them have a phone that they could be looking at all kinds of unsafe internet sites. And so they'll, I've seen them even, put that in documentation to take them back to court to say they're putting the child in harm's way because they bought them a phone. And so, they'll do things like that. It's crazy. I mean, it sounds crazy, and it is crazy, but they will do things like that.
Right.
Yeah.
So here's one I wanted to spend some time on a little bit. So using or abusing court processes.
Yeah. And so I had a client a few years ago that I think at last count, she had gone to court about 15 times.
Oh my gosh.
And they had 3 children together, and she, every time she turned around, she was getting taken back to court for something. Usually it was, not enough visitation, or that she, what he would do is he would ask her to see the kids on an off day or weekend, and when
not a period of his possession is what you're talking about.
And when she would refuse, he would scream parental alienation, and so then he'd take her back to court for alienating the children when she was just simply saying no because they had football practice, or they had something they had to be at, not because she was trying to be difficult. She just, they had other obligations, and if she said no, he would find a way to call that parental alienation and take her back to court.
So once again, it is incredibly important to document all of these things.
Correct.
And then additionally, it is even more important to hire the right lawyer, and you need to talk to the lawyer up front about all of this stuff that is going on and what you think is actually happening here. Because if you don't, then the lawyer doesn't know what he or she is facing. So when you go through the interview process of, what lawyer should I hire? One, start with someone who's board certified, so they've got a much more heightened level of expertise in these things. But then you need to educate them on, here are the things that are going on, and so that they know that of part of the strategy that is going on, that they can start educating the court.
Yeah, and that's true too. And also even, finding out if your attorney understands pathology.
Sure.
And what I mean by that is cluster B personality disorders. So, as we talked
And
about.
so when you say cluster B, can you educate the folks out there as to what we're talking about?
Yep. So you remember last time how I told you the word narcissism is grossly overused out there.
Absolutely.
And, really, truly, narcissism is just grandiosity and attention seeking.
Right.
It is not all of the litany of bad behaviors that a lot of people call narcissism.
Right.
It's actually a lot of times when there's deceit and manipulation and egocentricity and, the pathological line, that's actually psychopathy or psychopath.
Right.
And then, the doing things within the letter of the law or, doing criminal behavior is actually sociopath. It's not narcissism.
Right.
And so many people out there, talk about narcissism. So they go in and tell their attorney, I've been married to a narcissist. And the attorney's like, yeah, whatever. Because, everybody comes in here and says I was married to a narcissist. No,
Right.
you need to educate your attorney on exactly all of the things that you were dealing with. So your attorney at least knows how to fight for you.
Right.
And because oftentimes, that doesn't happen. They just come in, to you. I'm sure you've heard it a million times. They come in and say, I'm pretty sure I was married to a narcissist. Well, actually, some of that, high rage, tendencies and high emotionality is actually borderline personality disorder. It's not narcissism.
Right.
And so, for the attorneys to even be educated on what pathology is, which are personality disorders, multiple. So antisocial, which is sociopath,
Right.
psychopathy, which is psychopath, narcissism, and borderline personality disorder. And that makes up what's called cluster B. So it's a cluster of personality disorders. It's rarely just one. And that's what, a lot of people think I've just dealt with one thing. No, you've probably dealt with 2, 3, or 4,
Right.
And not just one. So once the attorney can kind of identify that, and I gave you that pathometry checklist so that
Right.
even, you could do that with your client if you chose to just see, like, I want to know what you experienced. So therefore, then you're a little more educated about what you're going to go up against in
Right.
the court system.
Yep.
Because they're going to use everything on that checklist, as part of the way they fight in court too. And
Right.
so what happens a lot of times is they will, just like they fought in the relationship, which was unfair and erratic and dramatic, right, and chaotic, they'll do the same thing in the court system. So they'll, everything will be, blame shifting to the one partner. It'll all be, that they're alienating the child from them, when in actuality it's them creating all of the chaos.
Wow. That is, that's, as an attorney, that's a difficult thing to deal with. So it's super important to be educated
Absolutely.
about that, because if you're not, you really don't know how to educate the court. And that process of educating the court needs to start from the very first time that you are in front of the judge.
Absolutely.
So there are certain behaviors, and unfortunately, our judiciary, I don't think, is trained in all of this to the extent that they need to.
Right.
And frankly, the U.S., this is my humble opinion, okay, at least Texas, let's say Texas,
Right.
for sure, is not ready to get into any kind of, economic coercion and power and control and things like that, like that we're talking today. But you can educate an individual court, an individual judge about these, so they have they're looking through things with a different lens.
Right, because if you have, let's say the unsafe parent makes 10 times what the safe parent makes, right? And the unsafe parent is the one filing all of these allegations all the time, somebody needs to look at that. Like you said, maybe it's true that this parent is the unsafe one and this parent is not, but somebody needs to look at who is filing all these different allegations all the time, and who's getting bled financially completely dry. I've seen cases where women at the end of the day, and I say women, and it could be a man too, right, but where the safe parent feels like they have to give up custody of their child to the unsafe parent because they're running out of money. And so many of them will go pro se or represent themselves, so that they, they, can keep living and eating.
Right.
That they get so financially drained, they don't, sometimes even know where their next meal is going to come from, and therefore they'll give up custody to
Right.
the unsafe parent as much as it pains them to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is something that I have seen, that people have to make that hard decision. I've also seen people make that decision that they don't want to tap into certain funds that they have,
Right.
To do that. So it's a question of what is really important to you in that regard. So here's one that is very related to what we were talking about here in manipulating institutions. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. And so, they may, tell the court that they're now unemployed when they were self-employed, that their business is doing so bad that they had to close it. And what they'll do as soon as the court proceedings are over, they'll just open a new business.
Right.
I've even heard about them adjusting their W-2 wages if they're self-employed to a much lower amount so that they don't have to pay the proper child support. So in essence, they're manipulating the court system.
Yeah. Now let me mention a couple of things that the court has in its bag of tricks. So the courts in Texas can look back for a period of 3 years. So just because someone changed something,
Right.
You also have, someone being intentionally unemployed or intentionally underemployed. Okay. So you've got a way to combat those things. So someone who says that, oh, I can't get a job, I haven't been able to find a job, some people aren't willing to take certain kinds of jobs.
Right.
That's one problem.
That is a problem.
And you have other people that make something look on its face like what it is not. What it is not.
Exactly.
And so, so the court also, like I said, court can look back 3 years to see, what has been the average of what they have been making.
Right.
And so the court will do that a lot of the time. And so these are important things to talk about. If you think that, look, he's just doing this to manipulate the situation. I know he's doing stuff on the side. The problem is you've got to be able to prove that he is doing something on the side. Right. So sometimes it is just suspicion, but that's where you start looking into what the other party's actions are. So if they're saying that I'm broke, I don't have any money, I can't do this, I can't do that, but they're always going on vacation, or they just bought a new car.
Yeah,
or,
driving that new Mercedes.
That's right. Some things don't necessarily add up.
Right. And I think that's such good information, Mark. I know my clients need to know that they can go back 3 years, because oftentimes they feel helpless.
Right.
And I think, that's important also too for the attorneys to let their clients know that if this is happening, that we can look back over 3 years and see if there's actually, if he's actually playing games here. I think too, that's where forensic accountants come in also, that they can comb through and figure out where money's been going. I know they're not fail-proof, but I do know that they can be very helpful sometimes in those situations.
Well, especially like when you're dealing with self-employment, because one of the places that you look, retained earnings are earnings,
right?
Which means they're subject to distribution, and they should be looked at when it comes to the distribution of the marital estate.
Right.
It also should be looked at when you're determining what child support should be. So if you're at one of these things where you're trying to determine, should it be at max guidelines or where should it be? Well, if they haven't distributed $50,000 or $100,000 in earnings that they've got, it manipulates what it makes it look like someone is actually earning.
Right.
So it's important to talk about these things so that they can educate the court and explain to the court, look, Judge, we need to look back over the last 3 years here, because this person, we believe, is intentionally underemployed or intentionally unemployed at this particular juncture.
Right.
So those are all things that are going to be really important from an educational perspective.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's important to, and I tell this, I say this to my clients a lot. If you don't know what your financial income in the household is, you
Right.
need to find out.
Absolutely.
Because, you're in that marriage and you have just as much right to understand the finances as your spouse does. Now,
Correct.
they may try to withhold that from you, and oftentimes in these types of situations, they actually do. They try to keep the spouse, out of knowing any of the financial things. So if it comes to divorce, they can play some games. But, educate yourself on what's coming in and out of the house financially.
Right.
It's important to know, and it's important to have records of those documents for if you do need to see an attorney, you can take the documents and show what you feel like is probably accurate.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving over from the manipulating institutions, so here's one. It talks about banking. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, and that's the concealing financial resources. So they may change banks and not tell the spouse about it.
Right.
They may, remove money from, the children's savings accounts or college funds. I've seen that happen.
Yeah.
Where the college funds get drained, and then, here it's 2 years out, and the child's not going to have college funds.
Right.
So, that happens a lot too. And speaking of manipulating institutions, one of the ways that institutions get manipulated is the child support.
Yep.
There's been cases where they don't pay child support until it's just about time they're going to jail or going to court,
Right.
and they'll pay it, and then they're off the hook. But yet the safe parent has been struggling all these months without child support, and sometimes working 2 or 3 jobs, and so they'll manipulate the child support agencies as well.
Right.
By because a lot of times a lot of people have figured out, like, well, I can play this little game for 3 to 6 months and not have to pay before anything happens to me, because really in these situations when you're dealing with pathology, the target is the safe parent. Right. So they don't really care, especially if they've got antisocial. They don't care if the child support people are coming after them.
Right.
So they don't, the target is the unsafe parent. They want to make the unsafe parent as uncomfortable and financially strained as possible, because then too, they can blame the financial situation on the unsafe parent to the children. So there's like all of these, spinning wheels that happen all the time in situations like this, where, the unsafe parent will then get blamed because they don't have any money.
Right.
It's not my problem that your mother doesn't buy you things, or it's not my problem that you don't have enough food. Your mother, if she, would spend the child support appropriately, then you would have food. And in fact, they've been withholding the child support all this time. So, it's really a tough dynamic for a safe parent to be in when these types of games are being played.
Well, that's one of the things we were talking about before the podcast about, with child support. Child support is not technically late in the state of Texas until it's over 30 days late.
Correct.
So if it's due on the 1st and you're getting paid on the 29th and it isn't February, okay, then it's still timely. So there are ways to manipulate that situation. Just to jack with the other person.
Exactly.
And you see that. You see that. And that's something that courts need to take into consideration, that if there's no rhyme or reason to why a person is doing this, it's not that they're in financial hardship. It's not that, that they've had a really bad month or something like that. It's just that I'm making the same amount. I'm just choosing not to pay it until
they're just
here.
Poking at the safe parent. And the thing
That's
is,
exactly right.
And if they have pathology, they don't care if they're late.
Right.
It doesn't bother them a bit. And that's why sometimes they'll wait all the way until it's like they're about to go to jail for it, and then they'll pay up. And so that too, I think is information to take to your attorney, and to make sure the attorney is aware that these games are being played.
Right. Yeah, totally agree. The next thing they talk about is using the children.
Yeah. So especially the younger children, they'll use the children to blame the parent or shame the parent for their financial situation. And so even though they're the ones that have been, forcing the drain on the finances for the safe parent, they'll say things like, I'm sorry your mother doesn't ever buy you anything. I'll take care of that. So they'll they'll make it appear where it's the safe parent that's not providing, when it's actually them that are affecting that, and they're keeping the unsafe parent or the safe parent in financial distress all the time, so they can't do any extras for the children, but they'll paint it as they're choosing not to because they're not spending their child support appropriately, or whatever the case may be. Yeah.
So aside from, document, what other advice would you give to someone who's going through that particular scenario?
I always tell my clients, be the truth teller to your children. And so always tell your child, the truth is this. And I will always tell you the truth. And so that way the child starts learning that the safe parent is the one that they're going to get the truth from. And so, the truth is that I haven't had child support in the last 6 months, and I'm just waiting on it to be paid. And so, because oftentimes that story's not told to the child. And so they're over here blaming and shaming the parent and thinking it's really their idea when it's coming from the unsafe parent, right? And so the safe parent has to be the truth teller. They have to be the one saying the truth. You will always get the truth from me, and this is the truth.
So here is one of the problems that goes along with that, because courts really don't like parents to be talking to the kids about scenarios like that. So I think there is a movement afoot to say that this whole idea that you're not going to have any conversation with the kids about anything is ludicrous.
Well, and if you noticed, I never said your dad hasn't paid child support. I said child support has not been paid.
Yeah, but that's semantics. That's just semantics. So if you know who's paying, then you know who's not paying.
Right.
So it's the same thing there. But I mean, that's something that I personally believe that the courts need to change that.
Right.
So every single, that's not true. Most courts, have standing orders in place. And part of the standing orders is not to discuss the litigation. That's fine when you're dealing with a 5 or a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old.
Right.
But once you get past 8,
Agreed.
I personally think that really does harm, and is not good for the kids. You shouldn't be talking about, well, mom had an affair or dad had an affair or things like that.
Agreed.
But for the kids to understand, look, we're going through litigation right now. Both your dad and I think that you ought to be with us. These are things that, these are my personal opinions. Okay, folks, these are my personal opinions.
Right.
Standing orders will tell you, don't use my personal opinions on stuff like that, because I think they're wrong.
Right.
And I think most therapists tend to think that they are wrong, because once you get to that age where kids are inquisitive and they want to know not only where am I going to be spending the night, but am I okay over here? And, is what dad's telling me true? Or is what mom is telling me true? And I mean, I think that's the part that the courts have tried to cut off by just saying, okay, there's no communication whatsoever. And that's a way to solve it. It's also a way to cause more problems with some of these kids, in my opinion, than getting into a little more detail of, this is what you can talk about and this is what you can't.
Yeah, because it does cause alienation. If the child thinks that the safe parent is not providing well because they're not getting the child support, or they're misusing the child support, when the truth is they're not, because they haven't received it. I don't think that's unfair to tell a child if they've been told that the other parent's been misusing the child support, because they're that party is guilty of trying to shame and blame the safe parent. So it is semantics. You're right to be, to speak the truth. But I agree. I don't think children need to know about affairs. I don't think they need to know about the sexual life of the parents. But there are certain things that I think in this case, with finances, I think sometimes they have to be told, I didn't get child support. I can't buy that extra thing you're wanting.
Right.
And I don't think, I don't think that that's wrong, but you're right. It sounds like it's very cookie cutter, as far as in the eyes of the court
Right.
of how they see that you can't talk about anything.
Yeah, and I understand, here's another part of it. Let's say that one party really is going through, and they're the ones that are supposed to be paying child support, but they're
Right.
really going through some financial hardship.
Right.
They've lost a job. They're having a hard time finding something else. To sit there and beat the hell out of that parent because they haven't made
Right.
their child support
Agreed.
payment, where it's like, look, I don't have the ability to make that child support
Agreed.
payment. There's a fine line. And so it's where each case needs to be looked at separately. And
Right.
so just having these standing orders
Right.
are great on certain things, but on certain other things, we need to put things in place that are more case specific
Correct.
than more case general. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right. And I think you're right. I think if a parent really truly can't pay child support,
Right.
and that can be proven,
Right.
then that should be the truth that the child is told, in my opinion, and like my opinion is the same as yours, like you still need to talk to your attorney first. But I think that, if that parent, even if it's the unsafe parent, really truly can't pay, then when that child comes to the safe parent should just be able to say, right now there aren't financial means on either side
Right.
to be able to do the things you're asking. So still telling the truth, but not in any way blaming or shaming that other parent. But it's unfortunate in cases like this because the insidiousness of the blame and shame comes through the child to the safe parent. And then, by the court documents, they're trying to do the right thing and not, be unkind about the unsafe parent, but sometimes they're backed into a corner where they have no choice but to tell the truth and just say, I'm not getting child support.
Sure. So another area on the wheel that it talks about here is using economic abuse.
Yeah. And so that can show up in cases like where there's a marriage and one of the partners are requiring the partner to pay rent. I think it depends too, how you set up the marital arrangement, if both people contribute to the household fund or, how it needs to be determined very early on.
Sure.
But I've seen cases where, you have the unsafe parent making 10 times what the safe parent makes, but yet, here the safe parent is working 2 or 3 jobs and they're being required to pay rent.
Right.
And so, or they may be required to pay all the household bills and rent, so, but too, that's where, if you come into a relationship boundaryless, then your boundaries, what little you have, are going to be, steamrolled over. And so really it's up to you in the very beginning, to have boundaries with that person, because that can prevent you from even marrying into a pathological love relationship if you have boundaries in the beginning, because a lot of times somebody with pathology won't tolerate boundaries and they'll end up showing you who they are. And so, do your homework in the beginning. When you're dating someone, make sure that whether or not they will honor your boundary system or not.
Yeah, it's hugely important to have these discussions prior to getting married. So, here's something that happens all the time. One party owns a house, the other party does not.
Right.
You're going to get married and move into that house. So you should be having conversations about what are your expectations as far as, are you going to put me on the house? Are you not going to put me on the house? And there's not a right or wrong answer there necessarily. You could say that, hey, I want to buy a house that is ours, and that's something that I would counsel if that's something that you want to, that's something that seems to be a pretty smart move. But also, if you're going to stay in that house, are you paying rent? How are things going to be paid for? What kind of access are y'all going to have
Right.
to each other's monies? Because it's
Exactly.
becoming more and more commonplace that, people keep, we're going to keep our money separate.
Right.
But here's something to understand in Texas, folks. That doesn't mean jack diddly shit. It doesn't have any impact at all, because that's all still community property. All of it is still community. What's yours is yours, and what's yours is mine.
Yeah.
That's what community is,
Yeah,
basically.
exactly.
Okay, so just because you've kept it separate, and they've got 100,000 over here, and you've got $15.23,
Yeah.
guess what? The 100,000 and $15.23 is what is community.
Right.
And
that's
so you are
usually
just
a
as
split.
that's right. You're
Yeah.
just as entitled to those monies as the other party.
Right.
So, that's something that people need to understand.
They do. And I think oftentimes, in situations like this, the unsafe parent has been, so emotionally abused over the years, and they're often told that they can't survive without the abusive partner. And so then, when it comes time to divorce, one, they can't afford an attorney because all the money's been held, out of their reach.
Right.
And then two, they don't think that they can financially survive without them, and they don't think they'll get anything in the divorce because that's what they're threatened. They're told, you won't get anything if you leave me. And so because of that, a lot of women will stay when they should actually be consulting an attorney, as quickly as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes for both men and women.
Absolutely. Yeah, because it can
regard.
actually be in the reverse. I know a lot of times we talk about it's him, and the safe parent is her, but
Right.
it can be in the reverse. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I see that kind of stuff happen all the time. It is more and more common that I'm seeing, a stay-at-home husband, in these scenarios, and wife is the big earner, and and so these can be totally, flipped on their heads.
Exactly.
So, the last one on this wheel is coercion and threats.
Yeah. Forcing her to borrow money from her family, because maybe he spent it all doing something else, gambling or whatever he's into. But oftentimes too, one of the things they'll do is they'll start trying to coerce the children into living with them, especially if they're old enough to have some input, so that they don't have to pay child support. So they'll do things like that, trying to, or they'll scream, parental alienation and try to bleed her financially dry, so that then she'll ultimately give up custody of the children because she can no longer afford them or the attorney fees.
So when
court
you start
costs.
when you start talking about coercing the children to live with them, what does that look like?
Well, and sometimes what they'll do is they'll be like Disney dad whenever the children are around. So
Right.
they'll play the, it's always going to be like this at dad's house, right?
Right.
And so the children think, well, I'm going to Disneyland.
Right.
This is great. I don't want to live with you. This, I have rules over here, and I can't have anything because we can't afford anything, right? And so it looks very appealing on that side. And so it doesn't really take much. It just takes the unsafe parent making it look really beautiful on their side. Yeah.
So what do you think of scenarios where, let's say, one parent buys an iPad for them, but doesn't let, this is where I see this, and I see this as being ridiculous. One parent buys an iPad for them, but no, that iPad has to stay over here. You can't take it over there. You can't use it over there.
I hear about that all the time.
Yeah, so that would kind of be the scenario that you're talking about.
Right.
We've all got all this great stuff and all these great clothes and everything, but you can't wear something and take it over to, mom or dad's house. You've got to keep it over here. It doesn't get to leave.
And then on that iPad, they get to do anything they want.
Right.
So they get to watch whatever they want, listen to whatever they want, chat with whoever they want. But over here, there's rules that, they can't, they have to go to bed at, 9 or 10 o'clock, and they can't be on certain sites, and they can't, watch certain types of shows. And so it makes this parent look, even though this parent's trying to, hold the child accountable and to a standard and not let them get into unsafe things, the child over here thinks this is going to be great. I'm going to go live with dad. I'll be able to stay up until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning playing whatever I want. And why wouldn't I want to live over there?
Right. Well, so we've gone through these cogs on the wheel. So what other words of advice would you have to people that they need to be watching out for to make sure that they don't fall into one of these categories or one of these scenarios?
Like I said earlier, I think knowing what the household finances are, and making sure that you have easy access to those things, that you have the passwords, just like, anything you have, that it should be shared also. But two, I feel like doing your homework before you marry someone, making sure that that person, will honor your boundaries, that, they're not going to take advantage of you in that way. I think that's really important. And then to also monitor your own finances, in the marriage situation, making sure that, you have a safety net, should you need it, to be able to seek legal advice.
Well, that is all fantastic advice. And thank you for joining us again. And we will look forward to the next scenario. And maybe next time I think we've gone through the wheel. So we will get through into a few other things. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you,
and
Mark.
Thank you all for being here and joining us for another episode of the Reclamation Transformation. And remember, change starts with you. So leave your mark.